Good afternoon and welcome to CPO Rising 2K20, the Resiliency Imperative, Session 19, Top Strategies for Leading a Resilient Procurement Organization featuring Linda Chuan from Box and Andrew Bartolini from Ardent Partners. My name is Christopher J. Dwyer, VP of Research here at Ardent Partners, Ardent's resident contingent workforce and future of work expert. Very, very excited to be here. We've got some great content for you all today. Want to run through our agenda very, very quickly. Going to have some very quick introductions to not only our wonderful speakers today, but our Resiliency Imperative series. We will chat about some strategies for a resilient procurement organization. The team here has some recommendations for action and, of course, some Q&A at the very end of the webcast. So before we dive in, just a few housekeeping notes. Yes, we know the number one question everyone asks at a webinar. You will be receiving a copy of today's slides immediately after the session. We are reserving some time at the end of the event for Q&A, so please feel free to enter any questions into your questions tab on your GoToMeeting box. And if you have any technical questions whatsoever, feel free to reach out to GoToSupport, or alternatively, you can chat me, Christopher Dwyer, and I'll do everything I can to help you. And today's recording will be available through May 31st on the virtual series site, virtual.cporising.com. A little bit about Ardent Partners. Ardent Partners is a Boston-based research and advisory firm laser-focused on supply management and the source-to-pay process, including procurement, accounts payable, procure-to-pay, and the contingent workforce. We advise clients and publish research that helps business decision makers understand industry best practices and how to improve performance. And we also publish research that covers the technology landscape and helps professionals identify the best fit solution or solutions for their specific budget and requirements. Easiest way to engage with us, visit cporising.com and catch the latest research, news, and analysis on procurement and other insights as well. And it is the busiest site globally focused on procurement. And so we mentioned that today is session 19 of a virtual series that began back on March 31st. And these sessions culminate in our first virtual summit, which captures some of the series highlights as well as brand new presentations and presenters. If you enjoyed today's session or webinars in general, this event is for you. Registration is complimentary, and you can visit the site virtual.cporising.com for more details on the other 19 sessions as well as Thursday's big summit. So why attend the summit on Thursday? Well, very simple. The goal of the overall series and the summit in particular is to help bolster your team's resiliency to get through this big setback, and of course, help position your team to succeed when we inevitably do bounce back. Big thanks to today's sponsor, Scout RFP, a Workday company, is the sourcing and supplier engagement platform trusted by procurement teams to streamline their processes, manage a unified pipeline of projects, and collaborate with stakeholders and suppliers to achieve greater business impact. More than 240 global brands trust Scout RFP's automated sourcing and auction platform to deliver greater impact through seamless business engagement. Managing billions in project spend, Scout RFP's powerful platform helps make enterprise commerce faster and more transparent, reduces risk, and drives profitability. Visit www.scoutrfp.com for more questions. Very excited to introduce today's presenters. Linda Chuan is the head of strategic sourcing and procurement at Box. She is a tenured sourcing executive with a public accounting background and a strong ability to execute from vision and strategy. She's experienced with organizations large and small, GE Capital, Gap, PeopleSoft, Siebel Systems, Yahoo, Salesforce, and Thomson Reuters during various phases of growth and right-sizing. Linda has an end-to-end understanding of business processes. Her approach to problem solving is holistic, mixed with the right amount of discipline, creativity, agility, and flexibility. She has demonstrated successes with real results time and time again, leading to successful transformational digitization strategies. Linda is currently serving as Box's head of sourcing and procurement, building industry-leading supplier risk and onboarding processes, while also contributing to Box's bottom line. Linda is best known as a pioneer, advocate, and co-champion of CRM for the buy side at Salesforce. Linda has demonstrated how CRM can be utilized for the buy side to realize automation and efficiency while achieving transparency and savings. She's been a 3-time Dreamforce speaker, where she was the sought-after thought leader in the topics of social supply chain, CRM for the buy side, machine learning and procurement, the future of digital supply chain, and predictive sourcing, just to name a few. Linda has led digitization transformation of sourcing processes multiple times with innovative solutions. She's thought of as the procurement futurist in digitization, transformation, innovation, and agility. It has been dubbed procurement royalty by her peers. Linda, welcome to today's event.
Wow, thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction here.
And joining Linda is Arden's founder and chief research officer, Andrew Barnolini, who has over 20 years experience working in sourcing, procurement, and supply management, the last 11 leading the charge at Arden Partners. Andrew, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Hello and good day to everybody. Right, so session 19 of something that we really just started 5 or 6 weeks ago, and is really culminated in some fantastic sessions. And I'm really excited to once again co-present with Linda on really the topic and main theme of the overall series, and that is resiliency. Now, since 2000, the global economy has been increasingly driven through its supply chain, right? For those of you that have been around for a while, remember the big push for global sourcing, or low-cost country sourcing, as it's been known variously, and means in large part, sourcing from China. But today, right now, right, May 5th, the global supply chain is under attack. May 5th, 2020. More broadly, business operations within most enterprises are facing unprecedented change, extreme threats, and entirely new challenges. But, we often think that, from Arden, that, the challenges of each day present opportunities within them, right? And we're convinced that procurement and supply management leaders are the ones who will help save us and eventually win the day, right? The people and teams that are in the Arden Partners community, in this industry, are resilient, and we strongly believe that we can be resilient together. And that's really the focus of today's presentation, right? We're going to go through a series of strategies, and Linda's going to give her perspective on some of the things that are helping bolster her team today. And before we get to those strategies, right, I just want to reflect back. Just a short time ago, right? The last time Linda and I were sitting together was at the Spark conference in San Francisco, February 24th, 25th, 26th, 2020. And what we were doing then, right, was talking about trends and predictions and the things that were really going to drive a successful sourcing and procurement organization in the decade ahead. And I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, right, this seems like a lifetime ago, and not just because we've done 19 or 20 sessions in that period of time, but it's a very different world. And what we were talking about back then, right, as I mentioned, was what are the keys, procurement's keys to the future, right, and certainly the characteristics and needs of individual procurement organizations that operate in companies of different size and in different regions and in different industries all have unique needs, unique keys, if you will. But as we had gone through our research and sort of looked at, well, what are the table stakes, right? You need to have talented people. You need to have systems that align with your processes and enable intelligence and scalability of expertise. And agility and boldness, right? So all of these are needed, but all of a sudden, other things have gotten in the way, right? And it's no longer. I think as I was trying to structure this webinar, right, thought it was an interesting contrast to just, a little bit more than 2 months ago, we're talking about the future of procurement and where procurement is going to be in 2030. And, where we are right now is entirely, an entirely different situation. And while, Many saw, the rise of supply risk, right? We wrote a pretty extensive brief over here on the right that's still accessible for free on our site, that really talked about, the global supply chain being a largely 21st century phenomena, and it was driven by the expansion of communication, the increase of technology, and at the core, driven by a demand for lower cost sources of supply and production. And these global supply chains delivered extraordinary value to Western-based corporations. And huge amounts of supply have been moved offshore in the ensuing 2 decades. We saw, from our perspective, if you read the report, right, really we were honing in more on the geopolitical risks, and sort of came away with the thesis that while certain pockets of or certain supply chains had been tested at various times, whether that is through whether that was the floods in Thailand or what happened in Fukushima a few years ago, we did end up seeing some significant challenges, but nothing that was broadly focused on across the entire supply chain, and nothing certainly that we could have predicted. And this just taken maybe from last week, right? The numbers are now significantly higher. Almost no one saw this coming. I mean, to be fair, there were people that were talking about global pandemics, and I look at the English Premier League, which is the major soccer or football league, in England. They have for the past 9 years taken out pandemic insurance, and this year it paid off for them. So it's not that this is an entirely black swan event, but the scope of it, the speed of it, and the impact of it, which is still unclear. I think it's fair to say that most of us, didn't see an event like this happening. And so what do we do with that, right? So, I think the choices are, how you respond really, it is, these times that, allow organizations to really ascend to greatness, if you will. And, sort of the challenge, and I harken back to this slide, which we introduced in session 2, which seems like it was also years ago. But really the concept of keeping the business running, right? You have to respond to the situation. You have to play the cards that are dealt to you, and how you respond and what you do really then defines your longer term success, and the goal. And really the conversation that we're having today is, how do you drive resiliency? How do you make it through these very tough times so that when the better times start to emerge, you're still there, you're still engaged, and you're positioned for success. And so, with that, right, we're going to dive into the main strategies for a resilient procurement organization. And I guess I wanted to start with a definition of resilience, and I guess I look at number 2 here, right, an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And I think by and large, right, those of you listening, viewing today, or if you're viewing this later on demand, right, you're viewing this from home, and maybe that's not an unusual situation. I know that those of us that work in in high tech and in the analyst world, right, have adopted a work from anywhere mindset. This has been it's simply not the case, and we'll dive into an example in the conversation I had with a CPO in a minute. But we're all dealing with a situation that was unexpected, and I think what we have to do now is figure out what we can best do to go forward. And so, Linda and I were talking, and we put together sort of a model. We wanted to model what the discussion that we had back at the Spark conference in San Francisco at the end of February, and really try to apply it to today's situation. And so what we ended up doing, right, was we borrowed or used some of the keys to procurement's future, but we're now going to look at it through the lens that we're forced to look at, right? So looking at a lens of procurement organizations that are dealing with an almost entirely remote workforce, are dealing with huge disruptions in supply chain, around the world, and can be global supply chains, can be more local supply chains. There's been more written about the global supply chain and supply chain in general in the past months than has been written in the 11 preceding years that Arden's been around writing about the supply chain. And we certainly welcome more voices to the conversation, and we're going to welcome Linda's voice here in a second. But our thoughts are that let's look at what we think are some of the top strategies to help organizations get through these tough and challenging times. And so organizational intelligence, right? I think is really the starting point here, right? So you need to be equipped and smart and understand situations. You need to be able to process information. But it's not simply the capturing of information and data, and it's not simply the processing of that data, right? You actually have to put it to work so that value can be created, right? You've got to convert that intelligence into value. And I referenced one of the first conversations I had was with a CPO in a huge company. We were talking about a project that we were going to put together in probably right around this time, and she put a pause on that because she had to deal with dramatic changes in the supply chain. And so this is a company that is in one of the industries that is I don't know if you call anybody winners in the situation, but a company whose business has not been completely devastated by the pandemic, and in fact has grown in demand because of it, because of what they do and where they sit. And while their focus was in trying to reconfigure plant operations and look at their different manufacturing capabilities to begin to manufacture and change out the product mix of what it was that they were bringing to market because the demand had shifted. That was keeping her busy full time. But her other full time job she found was that she was dealing with a large global team, but a large global team that was used to commuting into an office each day and working with each other, right? Co-located, right? And sharing cubes and sharing offices and sharing space and a community. It was I think the conversation was right in the middle of March, and I realized then, right, that so many of us are used to driving in and commuting, and not everybody is has the home office setup that allows them to just sort of shift between work and home easily, and that people and organizations are dealing with this as a long-term challenge or as an intermediate challenge. We'll have to see how this plays out. And so a couple of years ago, I wrote about procurement entering an age of intelligence, and it was actually the theme of our CPO Rising Summit in 2018. And as I remember sort of researching the concept and idea of intelligence, in many ways, right, intelligence is in the eye of the beholder, right? Such as beauty is, right? You have a broad range of intelligence types, right? You can be book smart, you can be street smart, you could be a right brain person, you could be a left brain person. And as I started to think about, well, how does a CPO who has gotten into their role because they understand business process, they understand how to communicate, they understand how to lead, they understand how to make how to be decisive, most probably, or at least the top ones do. Certainly, looking for stronger leadership, is an opportunity at many procurement organizations. But as Linda and I were talking, right, it became clear that you also have to balance the mindset of your team. Chris, our moderator, gave a presentation about 2 weeks ago as part of this series that was focused on how do you keep a remote workforce engaged and productive. And part of it was looking at self and taking care of yourself. Part of it was communicating. Part of it was building team activities and being accessible. But I think a large part of this is the intuition, right? The emotional, the EQ, so that you can sense where people are, because people are responding to this differently based upon who they are from a demographic standpoint and the types of risks they may or may not be exposed to with the pandemic. They may be dealing with this differently based upon where they are. And based upon their overall mindset, and I think it takes in these challenging times someone who's attuned to the way that different people respond to different situations, right? So I'm on the board of a school here in Boston, and one of the things that the school has been very focused on is really trying to identify and understand how the different students in the population learn. And I think that as has been studied and shown, people learn differently, and based upon how you learn, you're going to be more adept and equipped at picking something up if it's delivered one way versus another. And I think that as the CPO, as the leader of an organization, how you engage and how you respond to different people within your organization, needs to necessarily be more nuanced. And so, going to bring our CPO expert into the conversation now, and going to talk a little bit about intelligence and intuition. But Linda, as the leader of your organization, how do you bring intelligence and intuition into the mix as you try to mitigate risk for your organization?
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. I just wanted to say how honored I am to be included in your session here. And some of the things that we had talked about in February, and the reason why we felt like we could sort of use some of the keys to the future, is that I believe they're still applicable in today's situation with the unprecedented and unforeseen situation with COVID-19. And so what I usually like to say is, with my building and transforming organizations, I typically keep a mindset of like looking ahead. A couple of years ago, you and I both did a webinar about 5 steps to sensational sourcing. And one of the things I talked about was the ability to have access to the tools that you need, online, digital, in the cloud, anywhere. And so that was like 3-4 years ago. And even before that, I've been transforming and digitizing companies 5, 6, 7 years ago. But I have to say, though, that keeping sort of that mindset of the ability to do what you need to do, to be able to do what you need to do anywhere, is key as well. But knowing that you bring in these solutions and tools to help your organization and your teams to move faster, to scale, to gain data from your supply chain activities, that brings you some of the information that you might need for the intelligence portion of mitigating your organization. But I always say, as you are working and doing your day-to-day activities, you should be thinking about risk already. It shouldn't be like a after the fact, because by the time something happens, as we've seen in this whole COVID-19 situation, that by the time you need it and you're not set up for it, it probably is a little bit too late, right? And so I'm seeing companies who are scrambling to be ready for or even be productive as people are working from home. Little did we know that when you and I met last at the end of February, 2 weeks later, my company, Box, had mandated work from home at that time. And so like for me, it's already been about 2 months. I've been sequestered at home for about 2 months, but they kind of took the aggressive position before the government and the governors decided to make everyone work from home. And so it's like it's taking, that doing the right thing, and it kind of brings it back to, I think you talked a little bit about, when we were chatting, about like being street smart versus book smart. And so there are things that we know and we've learned, right, as a CPO, either working through the ranks, or if you got or received your master's degree from supply chain institutions. But then for some of us, we worked our way up through the ranks. And so you kind of have to balance that the book smart with the street smart portion. And it does take sort of take it comes full circle in terms of whether you're ready from a day-to-day keeping the lights on perspective, and on top of that, when and if something happens, and how, then are you ready for that, and keeping that sort of at the back of your mind as you're negotiating contracts, as you're assessing supplier risk. What is acceptable, what is not acceptable. I doubt, to be honest with you, Andrew, like before this whole thing happened, I don't think most companies would probably not have any visibility or transparency to their like level 2 supplier risk, right? Suppliers to their suppliers.
Pretty rare.
But now it's pretty rare, but now I bet you it's at the forefront of everybody's minds. Except if you're trying to do something now, it's probably a little too late. And so I think the impacts of what's happening today is we'll see more of the impact and the true impacts the next coming, I don't know, weeks, months, as companies start to report their Q1 results. And so it's like tying all of that, being ready and trying to be ready for the unexpected. I think we as procurement professionals almost have to be a fortune teller oracle person to kind of think about what could happen but may not happen. And so I do spend a lot of time trying to figure out, with my current supply base, what's the strategy? Are there alternatives? Is there an exit clause? And I hate to say it this way because I don't enter into relationships this way, but you always have to think about a prenup somewhat. So if something happens and your strategic supplier can't perform, do you have a plan B? So this plan B has always been percolating in the back of my mind, and I can't always take the credit for being able to mitigate risk, but I'm very lucky to work at a company like Box, who has been purpose built to collaborate and have this content management solution anywhere. And this was like 15 years ago. So they were already thinking about this 15 years ago, the founders. And so with that sort of culture, we are encouraged to think of like innovation with intelligence, and try to do the right thing. One of our cultural values is to do the right thing. So I think if you sort of lead with doing the right thing for your employees and then for your supply base, then you can potentially mitigate risks that may not even be in a contract. So I'll kind of leave it there.
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit upon a huge number of points there, right? I mean, so I think that, yeah, no, but I mean, that's the challenge in front of most procurement organizations too, right? Is it's not just your own organization where it's an entirely different structure or work environment, right? I mean, this is your suppliers, this is your customers. This has been just a broad and pervasive disruption to the way business is done. And if you didn't have the crystal ball that predicted this, and as we've already talked about, most people didn't. It's what you do with it now that really is going to define you and your organizations, right? Because as I look at this, and again, big challenges, but huge opportunity, and huge opportunity for procurement as well, because. I'll talk about agility in a second here, but when the last sort of major sort of economic disruption, right, the Great Recession, now more than a decade ago, was really one of the big catalysts in driving the procurement industry and the procurement profession forward within the corporate world, within the corporate ranks, right? When organizations, in late 2008 and through 2009, and for some companies into 2010, the opportunities for sales growth and growth in general were muted and constrained, and the executive leadership of their organizations tried to focus inward and to look at controlling the things that they could control, and that aligned the CFO and his or her agenda, and the CEO and his and her agenda with the CPO's agenda. And it's likely that as we come out of this, there's going to be more focus and also more a greater ability to impact results at a time when your companies are going to need it. So it's going to be a challenge, but again, pretty big opportunity. And one of the ways that procurement is going to be able to execute and perform well is really linked to their agility, right? And so agility is another theme at one of our annual procurement conferences back in 2016, and have written about and focused on it extensively, really sort of understanding that there has been a shift in the way that that the top procurement organizations are engaging with the business. There's certainly been a shift at the top, as companies change business strategy and respond to competitive threats and opportunities in a much more dynamic way. The need for everybody working within the company, not just procurement, but everybody needs to be much more aligned with the direction of the company, and then also understanding that while we're going down this one path today, that path may change and shift, and we may have to redirect. And so the leading procurement organizations are working to layer in the capabilities and flexibility, so that when their organizations are called upon to focus on something else, they're ready. And this is exactly that, right? So the definition of procurement agility and the definition of resiliency is how do you play play the tough hand that was dealt to you, right? How do you respond? First, I guess the question probably is, can you respond? Are you equipped to do so? And then what do you do? What do you do going forward, right? And so, organizations that have looked at, sort of building flexibility into their processes, right? And sometimes it's as situational as what category you're sourcing, right? And how nuanced is it, versus, sort of larger, broader macro topics that are going to drive the success or failure of your company. And so, we see the success of many companies coming out of this as being driven through the supply chain and as being driven by the procurement organization. And I think that the work that we've done, and certainly we're not alone in sort of touting and focusing on procurement agility, but organizations have been focusing on it, and while not universal, the fact that a majority have some level of agility built within them, I think is a positive, certainly, and that a group, as within any market research study that we do, there's always a group of top performers, and even if the scores that you see here are based upon our annual State of Procurement report, or our 15th annual report that I've written. And so it's about 330 global CPOs from around the world. And so they were asked to self-score. And so the score is going to be, maybe slightly higher, than the reality of the situation. But the point is that more companies are looking at this, and, we have long thought that, that procurement agility was going to be, the defining characteristic of best-in-class and top operating procurement organizations in the future. And when we were talking about this in February, we were thinking about the entire decade. And well, guess what? The future is now. The future is today. And so I'm, remembering another conversation, right? So, a participant in our global survey, we like to interview CPOs, and while we didn't interview as many this year as I have in the past, just because everybody's trying to sort of deal with their situations, I thought that this was a pretty good example, right, of a company learning on the fly, sort of becoming agile by necessity. And I harken back to the Great Recession. One of the things that happened in the 20-teens or in the 2010s, 20-teens, however you call it. One of the things that happened in the aftermath was that there were a lot of chief procurement officers who moved out from out of their procurement role into a role that had much greater responsibility. And it's in part because they executed well, but it's in part because the other executive leaders within their companies actually start to focus in on procurement for the first time, right? I used to say in the earlier part of the decade that it wasn't that CEOs and CFOs didn't believe that procurement could add value. It's just that they'd never seen it happen. And so there are these kinds of opportunities where if you're the CPO and you're looking at who are the performers that are really, shining now and leading your organizations, maybe they're your direct reports, maybe they're the people you never really paid too much attention to. And in a, sort of carrying that analogy over to the larger procurement organization and team, it's what you do in the situation that really defines us, right? I'm struggling to find that quote of how you respond in crisis, is shows the real you, and I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, but again, layering in agility, and if it's not there, working to manufacture it, I think is really, really going to be important. And for those of you that are in organizations that have pushed pause, now's not the time to push pause and just wait as well. Now's the time to engage with the executives to figure out what the strategy is when people start to push play again. And now's the time to start thinking about your organizations, doing those assessments, understanding what it is that you're going to need from them from a capability standpoint, from a technology standpoint, from an engagement standpoint, and from a mandate standpoint, but from an empowerment standpoint, that's going to let you hit the ground running. So, Linda, right? You're in this situation with everybody else here. Talk a little bit about agility and continuity, and the role that you and your team are playing there, and and the impact on resilience. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. It's during times like these that procurement professionals shine. And I think smart companies who are strategic, well, maybe I shouldn't say smart company, but strategic companies who think longer term, understand the value that procurement can bring to the organization. And those companies who may not have a sort of a strategic view of procurement might find themselves at a time, I don't know, 5 years, couple years from now, I would think, because the timeline's getting shorter, that where they would have looked back and said, man, I wish I could have, would have, should have, invested in procurement professionals, in a procurement organization, so that today I would have a good visibility on managing my spend, my suppliers, and having that margin story that many analysts and Wall Street's looking for. And so no longer can procurement organizations take time to do what they need to do, because the way we have evolved in the marketplace, our business partners, in order to support them, right, they can't wait 2-3 months for an RFP to be completed. They can't wait even weeks to have a contract negotiated. And so the speed to execution is becoming more and more critical and more a requirement of a CPO. And so having joined Box last August, and in my short amount of time, I realized that I really needed to help my team, and I also see it as part of my job as the CPO, is to help my team have the business tools they need in order to have that speed to execution, as well as helping the team scale. And we all know all procurement organizations are most likely under-resourced. And how many of us would even say, hey, when you get asked the question, do you believe you have the right resources? How many of us would really raise our hands and say yes, right? We're always under-resourced. And so part of that puzzle, right, to solve then is how do you then support the business with speed to execution? And then how do you then also give your team that ability, that scalability, so that you may not need the number of headcount resources that you normally would need? And so in thinking about the scale, speed to execution, and automation, bringing in tools like a Scout RFP, a tool, and it has to complement my box solutions on the back end too. But bringing in like cloud solutions that could be accessed anywhere with mobile capabilities, that has changed sort of how my business partners at Box have looked at sourcing. The fact that we can take something, whether it be an RFP or scoring of a supplier for demo, or a POC, and then having the ability to have access to the documents with Box on the back end, has made a huge difference because we can get to things faster. We can get to collaboration and agreement and alignment faster. And to me, it's all about speed. But what comes with that speed and scale and automation is then, of course, agility, right? The ability to be able to connect all of these tools together with our open API capabilities today. No longer would we have to like sign up for a platform solution. And you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. No longer do you need to sign up for end-to-end solutions that when you're sold by the account team of how it's supposed to work and how it's supposed to automate from module to module, and then when you go to implement it and it takes years to implement and it still doesn't work, and because the modules aren't connected, those days are over. And I don't know of if a supplier comes to me and is trying to sell me that kind of a model, I would not be very open to that, to be honest with you, because I am looking for, and there's been other studies, and including Ardent Partners too, where because of the technology and how it's evolved, best in breed solutions and the ease of open APIs to connect those best of breed solutions is the way to go, because there's so much waste. I see so much waste across organizations who have purchased, solutions that are just sitting there on the shelves and not being used. But utilization is huge, because if you're not utilizing that solution, you can't get to the data and the information and the intelligence that you need. And so thinking about, automation, speed, and access, mobile capabilities is key to being agile. And that means you can do business anywhere. You don't even have to be sequestered at home. Hopefully when we come out of this, we can work from, I don't know, Hawaii, and it still be okay.
No, dare to dream. Yeah. So right. I mean, those are going to be some of the organizational learnings, and so I'll pick up the pace on this one here. Yeah. Right. So when we were talking about the voice of the customer strategy, right? Really, the conversation that we had was about requirements, and it was about compliance to those requirements and understanding the organizational needs. And so voice of the customer in this is really, from procurement's perspective, it's understanding, well, what is it that our customers need and want, and how do we then go about executing and delivering on that? And I always think it's very interesting, right, that procurement has so many different potential customers, right? It's so uniquely positioned within a company to gain exposure to all parts of the business. And, I think that, you've got to understand the different needs of the different customers that procurement has today, and figure out how those needs are prioritized and how those needs are met. And again, right. So one of the challenges here is also that you're no longer co-located with the business stakeholders and budget stakeholders, and so relationships that existed and can be built upon is fantastic, but relationships that really were light or didn't exist need to be built. And so talk here a little bit about for you, right? So looking at the customer and the voice of the customer as a component of compliance,
right?
We're certainly in a very interesting time, right? A time of crisis. How are you ensuring that your customers remain a top priority at Box?
Wow. For any procurement professional, right? We have many masters. We service the entire company in terms of whether it's direct side or indirect side. And so at Box, what's really unique about the culture that I just love, there's a weekly lunch meeting that's given by the founders and the E-suite, the executives of the company, to share our company's current status, what we're focused on. And unlike some of my other previous lives, when the message is coming from top down, that supplier risk management and supplier spend management is a priority, that speaks volumes, right? And so with that message coming top down, I am having the time of my life in terms of my business partners, my customers, we call them Boxers at Box. They're coming out of the WordWorks to ask for our help, right? And it's like the best scenario ever. But at the same time, it's also a lot of volume in a very compressed amount of time. And so we have come up with sort of a set of like just very generic questions to ask our customers in terms of, what's the impact of their project, their purchase, their contract, other than it's coming up for, expiration tomorrow or something like that. But where things, activities, investments where we could potentially postpone to after, hopefully, as we are coming out of the COVID-19 situation, when we have a better idea as to where the corporation stands. Those we encourage, because we don't ever mandate, right? We encourage our Boxers to really think about, if this was your company, and that's another value that we have at Box, which is awesome. Think like an owner. If this was your company, right? What would you do, right? How would you manage spend at this company, and how would you manage supply risk? And so with those sort of values as our true north, it makes it kind of easy. At my other previous lives, though, it's a little bit more challenging. Though you may not get the top-down mandate, you just have to kind of influence your business partners and convince them that what you're trying to do really aligns with their goals and their objectives. Because at the end of the day, I believe we are a service sort of organization. And we have to kind of sell ourselves to our internal business partners. And the only way to do that is if you're helping them do their jobs better.
No, that's great, right? So manage it like it's your money. It's a great thing, and the sort of opportunity intake form. I remember doing those back in the e-sourcing days. So strategy number 4, right? Negotiation, and again, negotiation can mean many things, right? I think we all think of people in procurement and sourcing as negotiators, right? But right. Not everything is a supplier negotiation that ends up with a contract, right? You have to understand how to navigate relationships and ultimately come to an agreement. And in our research that we started and launched and that I referred to a few times, we launched a survey in January and captured most of the data. Or captured data through March, but most of the data came in early, and the CPO priorities for 2020 were sort of aligned with when we were thinking about the direction of the procurement profession over the next decade. But what's very clear right now is that procurement has a couple new mandates, and one is finding cash and managing it better. managing cash and impact on cash has been the number 2 CPO procurement metric after savings for a number of years. But I think coming out of this, it's going to be pretty clear that cash is king, even with the sort of the flood of government money in the market today. And that one of the big drivers of cash is savings. And so we expect that the information you see on this chart, where all of these things are important strategies, but what we certainly expect to see over the second half of this year and into 2021 is that we're going to see a pretty big increase in the amount of sourcing activity. And I'll before I get to Linda again, right, leave with this quote here. So had been working with an organization on a P2P technology selection, and we'd had a meeting set just a couple of weeks ago, and it was delayed for a couple of weeks because this CPO, or technically he's a number 2 person at a company. His company's products are sold by big box retailers, and all the big box retailers had closed their stores, and then had communicated to them that they were going to extend their payment terms by 90 days on top of what was already 90-day payments. So they could expect their money in 6 months. And so they had to figure out, what are they going to do? How do they navigate these times? How do they figure out what to do for their own cash perspective and negotiate these potentially new terms with suppliers and go back to their customers as well? And so it's understanding who your stakeholders are, and maybe it's taking a different approach. But Linda, when you're thinking about negotiations and looking at your stakeholders, what approach do you take to make sure that you, and sometimes it's you, the procurement organizations, and sometimes it's you, the company, get what you need?
So this takes me back to we as people, human beings, we all know how to negotiate. As a child, as a baby, you're negotiating, can I have this dessert now versus later, or do I need to do my homework now versus later? And so a lot of how I approach negotiations is that partnership of, like, what can I get to so that we both feel like we have a win-win solution? And I wanted to kind of comment on the last CPO perspective of what you had shared, like to go over or to go to your supply base and just sort of do a mandate across the board of, we're not going to pay you for 60, 90 days, whatnot, is kind of dangerous, because you have strategic critical suppliers that your company can't do without as well. And without sort of doing that analysis first, it's a really short-term view of your supplier relationships. And I am of the opinion, sort of a newer age professional procurement person, where I value relationships because I look for longer term relationships. I mean, the idea is you don't want to sort of pound your suppliers, and especially suppliers that you need, right, to the ground. And I always tell my suppliers that, yeah, I totally fully get that you need to make money and you need to make a profit, right? It's how much of that profit is what we're negotiating. And to the extent where this whole, time value of money, and everybody, especially during this situation, if you are holding back your cash to your suppliers, then they hold back their cash to their suppliers. There is a ripple effect. And so what I'm seeing is companies who are doing pretty well, especially in the sort of the high tech sector in the cloud, they're the executives, the senior levels, and even the CEO and the CFOs at Box, which enamors me to Box even more, where they can help the supplier, they are stepping up. And not like taking the supplier with a very commoditized view of, we're just going to pound you in here, we're just going to take 10% reduction across the board, because that doesn't work. And that doesn't work with your stakeholders either, because at any time when you reach out to the supply base or suppliers and they get a negative message, or they don't hear something they like, who do they go to first? They run to their stakeholders or to their business partners who are then your customers, right, internally. And so I take a very collaborative and partnering approach, and trying to get to a place where both of us can feel like we both got something out of the negotiation, as much as win-win as possible. I don't like the word compromise because it almost feels like somebody gave up something, right? And so
Right.
I share that from the very get-go with my suppliers. And so that really, and suppliers and business partners, and that usually I have a pretty good positive results from that.
Got it. So,
Yeah.
so I guess one of the questions here is, so what do you do with that, and what do you do with all of this? So we do have some recommendations, but again, just a reminder, that maybe procurement hasn't been exactly here before, but we have navigated some tough times in the past, and it has been because of procurement's successful navigation of tough times that they were positioned for success. And there's a large number of CPOs who have can now look back on their careers in procurement as they have roles that have greater responsibility and control. And so, I guess, Linda, right, so we've hit upon these 4 key strategies. As far as, overall, right, so what advice would you give to someone looking to strengthen their procurement organization?
From a tools solution set perspective, look for complementary tool sets that would give you that speed to execution, the data so that you can have insights and analytics later, and solutions that can help you scale and accessed anywhere, especially on a mobile phone, mobile able and ready. So that's from a tool set and enabling your team. And then when you're, I think somebody asked me this during the Scout session earlier in February, was how do you then look to recruit talent? And I think in the past, procurement organizations have looked at talent from a very analytical, you can negotiate contracts, and very linear, like you can negotiate contracts, review the contract verbiage. But I think we are evolving to where we need more business people, exactly like those with the business acumen to understand the levers of how to run a business and what's important. And so training or attracting folks with those skill sets would help to strengthen the organization and make procurement become more valuable in the organization as well, to your business partners, to the company overall, and so on.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, right? So we definitely have talented workforce as sort of a recommendation, right? And really as an attempt to answer that same question, right? So we think that the 4 strategies, right? The intelligence and intuition, the agility, hearing the voice of the customer and then negotiating to make sure that the customer is heard and that the needs are met, all important factors, right? But we do sort of revert back to, what are the things that great procurement organizations have, and it starts at the top with strong and in this case engaged leadership, right? How is your team doing, and how do you know? Right, but as well as decisive leadership. A talented workforce, a talented and engaged and motivated workforce that's accountable for work and results. Agility we've spoken a lot about in significant degree. Scalability of processes and knowledge, right? So really haven't hit too much on the technology component of this, but when we start to think about, well, where are we from a workplace location standpoint, going forward, and who are we dealing with, and how are we connecting, and how are we sharing knowledge and information, and how are we ensuring that our best practices are codified and improved upon going forward, right? Technology is going to play a big part of that, and of course, understanding your categories, understanding your suppliers, understanding, sourcing process and P2P, all very important, as well as supply risk, certainly in this day and age. And so, Chris, maybe we've got time for one question here. sort of ran right to the brink. But
right up to yes,
yeah.
lots of information. I really enjoyed the survey results, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great. I've enjoyed talking with you and getting your insights as well. Chris, anything for us?
Yes, there's a bunch of questions, but I think I've picked one that is very representative of everything that's happening, and this comes from James. How do you deal with the pressure as a CPO? Pressure to handle supply disruptions, pressure to manage a newly remote team, pressure to be an enterprise hero, etc.
I guess that's for me then.
Yes.
I guess you one day at a time. I often walk into organizations that have weaknesses or gaps in maybe process, procedures, technology, data, and so forth. And it's like I share with my team, how do you eat a big turkey leg, I guess, during Christmas, one bite at a time. So it's while you sort of think of the whole picture in pieces like a puzzle, you need to solve the puzzle. How do you put a puzzle together in pieces? When you find the corners, you kind of build from the outside in, and or where I believe there's the two mode that procurement professionals CPOs have to manage is that there's you can't take your eye off of the day-to-day running the business day-to-day, and then the other mode on top of that is that whole strategy and holistic mode. And so, yes, you have to kind of be able to go down to the day-to-day tactical, maybe running the business, keeping the lights on, maybe most of the time, 30-40% of the time, 50% of the time, but at least allow for 20% of your time resources to think about the holistic piece of how do you become more strategic, how do you build that scalability, and so on. So yeah, one step at a time. It's it can be can be overwhelming.
Great
way to end.
Thanks, Linda. Well, Andrew, Linda, thank you both so much. Great presentation here, great content, great insights. Big thanks to Scout for sponsoring today's event. Thank you all for attending today's webcast. We'll see you all on Thursday for our big virtual summit. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Great. Well, hopefully everybody heard that. You may have broken up at the end, but this is Andrew. Just as we sign off, again, great thanks to Linda for her invaluable insights and to Scout for their sponsorship of today's session. And hope to see you soon. So take care, everybody.